All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. All right. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Deran Young. Deran, welcome.
Thank you.
All right. So growing up with an incarcerated father and a mother who struggled with mental illness and substance abuse, Deran gained knowledge and experience of discrimination, poverty, and social services at a very early age. It was no shock then that later she decided to pursue a career as a helping professional. While obtaining her master's in social work at the University of Texas, Deran was blessed with an amazing opportunity to visit Ghana, West Africa. During her 6-month stay in Ghana, Deran created a guidance and counseling center at a high school in a neighborhood that has been historically identified as a population of lower socioeconomic status. During her work there, she also created a scholarship program titled Choices and conducted a cultural identity field trip for students to learn about African and African American history firsthand. Although the transatlantic slave trade has significant roots in Ghana, most citizens are not afforded the privilege to visit these historical sites due to financial difficulties and hardships. During this trip, 15 students were able to visit the Cape Coast Slave Castle and the One African History Museum. Her passion for culture and diversity led her to further explore social justice and social psychology issues. Her current professional areas of expertise include international social work, gender issues, and trauma anxiety disorders. Deran, welcome. Hello, crazy, inspiring bio. I was like, oh my God, of course you created something. And of course, it's awesome. Excited to have you here.
Yes, it's been a lot of life for me, a lot of life experiences, a lot of learning from trauma firsthand and teaching others what I've learned along the way. As a therapist, as a writer, as a teacher myself, but really even more so now lately as a leader. I have a nonprofit called Black Therapists Rock, which was established in 2016, and I lead a community of 30,000 Black mental health professionals. So advocating for them, getting to know what their unique challenges are, what the barriers are for their success, has really been eye-opening. And I always tell folks that I'm very much a systems thinker. When you grow up in trauma and we are in, neighborhoods that have a lot of violence or poverty, you learn to navigate systems really well. And we were a family that was involved in multiple systems because my mother had 3 children before she was 19 years old. So growing up in poverty, having a mother who, struggled financially and psychologically with her own mental health issues, and just really navigating, how to get by in the world, not only as a person in a Black body, but as a female Black body person and a person who was born in poverty and multiple generations of trauma and poverty and systemic challenges. So I'm a systems thinker is what I tell people. Social work really called to me because of that systems, that way, that nature of kind of who I am and how I see things, as well as my undergraduate degree is in social psychology, as you mentioned. So I'm always trying to understand groups and trends and patterns. That's something that I could just look out my window and see as a little girl who grew up in the projects. I could see trauma happening, right outside of our window. And I wondered if anyone outside of our community could see what I saw. Because to me, it was very obvious. It was, people were suffering in large numbers and they had a lot of things in common. And so I felt like there had to be some type of solution that would help these people. And the folks who were in charge of helping people, I was just curious, why they didn't see what I saw.
Where are you?
Where are they? What are they doing?
All right, let me pause you there. So a lot right there that I want to get into. So you had this experience growing up um, in trauma, but talk to us specifically about your experience. How were you impacted?
When I talk about my experience growing up in trauma, I also have to talk about, to balance the conversation out, I have to talk about strength and resilience as well. Because I also come from a family of women who were very resilient, very strong, very community minded, if you will, and solution oriented. So we were always looking for solutions to every challenge that we were faced with. It wasn't, you know, were we going to create a solution? We had to create a solution to survive. So although I came from a family where there was a lot of trauma and often undiagnosed or untreated trauma, there was also a lot of strengths around community and relationships and being together, like coming together and honoring each other and celebrating together.
So you were raised within that kind of.
I was raised by 4 generations of women, Black women. So my great grandmother, my grandmother, my mother, my aunts, cousins even. I was raised around a lot of people who were used to surviving and having to create solutions. And so they taught me very early on kind of how to look at systems and look at situations from a mindset of, growth and opportunity.
Give me an example.
For example, so my great grandmother, I always talk a lot about my great grandmother because she's one of the biggest presence in my life that still guides my life. She's now an ancestor, but like I said, I was born into a very young family. Most of the women in my family had children before they were 18. So my great grandmother would always tell me, that the beauty of me being born when I was born was that I would have access to things like birth control and other family planning resources that she didn't have. She would say back in her days, being born in the 20s, women got pregnant and that was just it. You were going to have a baby whether you were ready to be a mother or not. And that was kind of what she saw with my mother too. She saw that my mother had gotten pregnant and she was going to have a baby whether she was ready to be a mother or not. So my great grandmother, although she, being born and raised in the South as a Black woman, she actually picked cotton very early in her life. And towards the end of her life, she really dedicated herself to pouring into the next generation, which was my generation. So she was very involved in our upbringing. She couldn't walk at that point. She could barely walk. She was wheelchair bound and most of her time was spent in bed and, just not able to move around. But I remember she would get in her wheelchair and roll over to the piano. And she taught me how to play piano when I was 4 years old. So it's that juxtaposed, if you will, someone who picked cotton, someone who had many layers of their own trauma, from domestic violence to she lost a child to gun violence in their teen when she was a mother, when she lost a teen child to gun violence. Yet here she was, this patient, loving woman, in her 60s, able to still give something back and contribute to our family by teaching me music and so many other things that she taught me about our culture and our heritage. So I like to say that I come from a family that we're very proud of who we are. We're very, just able to celebrate our heritage and our culture in a very meaningful way that I've always known. My mother also has always been very adamant about making sure we knew Black history and heroes that were during her time frame, from Malcolm X and Dr. King and Maya Angelou and Rosa Parks, and just, even, Harriet Tubman, so many people that I was able to look up to as a little Black girl growing up in Texas. And I had faith, I had hope, I had aspirations of being something one day that could also contribute to my community and to our culture.
What's interesting and inspiring to me, Deran, is that, yes, you were brought up with a lot of trauma, but you also had this what seems to be this energy, this life force about the way the people around you were looking at things and living. Not everyone comes out of a childhood and sits here and has a perspective that you have, has done the things that you have, has the presence. You have this amazing smile that you lead with. I mean, it's incredible, seriously. And so, what was it about you? You said, when you were young, you were looking out the window and you're like, you could see sis. What was it about you that allowed you to see that?
I think even though our family had multiple generations of trauma in our bloodline, we also had multiple generations of love. I am very much the embodiment of my great grandmother, of multiple aunties and cousins who are just dead set on being a presence of love and of hope and healing. And so I think that my mom was very affectionate. When she was there, she struggled with substance use, as I think I alluded to earlier. And so she wasn't always present. There would be, we moved around a lot. We would move around probably 6 times a year. Between my mother, my grandmother, my aunts, my great grandmother, we were moving constantly. But the consistent thing in my mind was that I always knew I was loved somehow. Because somehow, my mom told me. She was very affectionate. Like I said, she was also very overwhelmed. And I saw that this was a woman who was trying her best to navigate the situation the best way that she could. And that she wanted to be with us. She wanted to be healthy. She wanted to be there for us. So that desire really, I don't know, it always stayed with me, that it wasn't necessarily her choosing that to not be with us or to not, be a mother, a nurturing, loving mother to us and to be able to develop us in the best way that she could, but that hadn't necessarily been given to her. And we live in a system where a lot of Black people who happen to be born in poverty don't have the same resources and access to things that help, don't have access to help the way that other people do. And being born in a Black body, we typically don't trust the help because historically it's been used against us in so many ways, from social work, and child protective services, the education system, the school to prison pipeline. Now as a scholar who studies these things, I know that these systems of care that are designed or typically don't have Black and brown bodies in mind. The prison industry, all of these different systems that have been built actually perpetuate more harm towards Black and brown bodies than helping. So that was kind of why I decided to become a social worker, because I wanted to understand how is it that these policies, these procedures, these institutions are put in place to help people, but they're actually missing the mark, really, really in a big way.
If I may, how old were you when you started thinking about these things, when you started seeing these systems were working or not working?
Well, like I said, I could see the difference in environment. So when I went to my grandmother's house, not my great grandmother, but my grandmother, she had escaped poverty. She was able to actually, kind of pull herself out of poverty as a nurse. And she lived in our country club area of our town. So when I went to stay with her, which was very often because she ended up adopting me. But when I stayed with my biological grandmother on my mother's side, we had access to swimming pools. We had access to, higher quality schools and teachers that seemed to be more engaged and involved. We had access to, it seems like we had more access to outside, like safe environments outside where we could play. The other kind of challenge in that area was that we were still Black. So even though we were in middle class where we had more access to things and more access to resources and opportunities, I felt socially excluded because there were certain families who wouldn't play with us. We had to know which homes we could go knock on the doors and which ones we weren't welcomed at. And so I learned how to navigate different systems according to where I was and who I was. And I think this is something that took me very far. So this was probably around the 2nd grade when I had to learn, okay, now you're in the upper class, you're in middle class neighborhood, and these are the rules for that neighborhood. They're not the same as the rules for growing up in poverty. So I had to quickly be able to shift back and forth. And I remember that really helping me as I went through high school and as I was in the military. I was actually in the military 18 years and retired in military healthcare.
Wow.
Yeah. So in the military, I needed to have those same shifting skills, if you will, to be able to see what are the unspoken norms or the rules that are culturally understood, but no one's saying it. right? You
Right.
just have to
Right.
know them. You have to, in order to be involved or included in the in crowd, you just have to know these rules and kind of be able to subscribe to them. So the military really helped me kind of perfect that, if you will, and then going to grad school and being in school in the education system at the secondary level, I feel like really helped me understand that. But also visiting, I've gone to 37 countries now, and just seeing different cultures and really valuing culture and seeing how different people live, navigate life every day in different settings. I think going to different cultures and different countries has really helped me see that the American way is not the only way. And that we have a lot that we can learn from other cultures and other countries, that we can actually adapt when it comes to healing and when it comes to being with people in a very genuine and authentic, connected way.
When did you decide that you wanted to pursue social work?
Yeah. So as I said, I joined the military right out of high school at 18 years old. When I joined the military, I was homeless at that point because my grandmother couldn't care for me anymore. My mother was very unstable at that point. Dealing with her own psychosis in my teenage years. And so I was kind of out in the world early by myself. I felt like I needed to figure out my life. I needed to, decide what I was going to do as an adult. So I joined the military because I knew that that would at least give me some professional skills as well as the academic background that I wanted. I didn't know how I was going to pay for college if I was homeless. So I joined the military. I was in the medical setting. I got to learn how to navigate, different clinics in the hospital. I was working at the immunization clinic, the allergy clinic, the dermatology clinic, all within my first 2 years in the military. And being around so many people that were professionally trained in healthcare, everyone was telling me the same thing. You're really smart. You have to go to school. If you're coming into the military with no education, make sure when you leave with as much as possible, because the military is kind of where people go to have school paid for. So I went there with the hopes of, getting my college tuition and everything covered. By the time I had been in the military for 6 years, I had my first master's degree, which is in public administration with a focus on human resources. So I really wanted to see systems and how people make systems work and happen effectively. So that was my first master's degree. And then I got my second degree in social work because I kept running into social workers in the hospital who kept telling me, you would be a great social worker. Because I was always advocating for patients. Most of my work in the military healthcare setting was patient advocacy. And I could tell that, people who spoke different languages, people who had different needs or different learning styles, and people who had different cultures were just not being seen or heard. And oftentimes in healthcare, that can result in someone dying. So I was always advocating to surgeons, to nurses, to doctors around what the patient was saying they needed and what the disconnect was. And so a lot of the folks that I would interact with would say, you're really good at advocating. You should consider social work. And I met a Black social worker in the Air Force who was also from Texas. And she told me the process of what social work school would be like. And I kind of had her as a mentor, and she really, believed in me and encouraged me. And so I went on to do it.
Wow. And as things evolved for you in that context, what did you see opening up for you? What did you want to pursue?
I think for me, my first degree, as I said, was in social psychology, and I really wanted to understand human behavior. I always joke around and say I needed to learn how to do life because I didn't have life. In the military, we call mental health life skills. And I found myself as a client, actually, in mental health or in the life skills clinic in the Air Force. And really wanting to understand how to navigate life challenges. I didn't feel like anyone gave me the skills to say, financial, this is how you handle financial stress. This is how you handle relationship stress. This is how you handle, the idea of having a child was really scary to me because no one in my family, was married before they had children, or no one in my family really was intentional about raising a family and having children. So I wanted to know if I was going to have a child, how to really, really be there for them emotionally, how to, trust the process or trust myself as a parent when you come from trauma. One of the things I think a lot of trauma survivors struggle with is how do I parent when I don't feel I was parented, when I didn't get the best parenting that I feel like I needed. So how do I give that to a child? And so I just had anxiety. I had a lot of anxiety and depression, and a lot of emotions and experiences that I just bottled up and never talked about. And when I went to Life Skills, which was, like I said, there was the mental health clinic in the Air Force. When I went to Life Skills, I had a therapist who really helped me see that a lot of what I was struggling with was actually normal given the situations that I grew up in. Having abandonment issues, having issues around neglecting myself or not having my needs met, and not advocating for my own needs. I was really good at advocating for everybody except me, right? So learning, how do I value my own needs and speak up for that? It was really a therapist who kind of started to teach me these things. What is boundaries? I'd never even heard that word, I don't think, in my home or in my upbringing. So going to therapy and gaining these life skills was really critical for me, while I was also in school learning about human behavior. And kind of learning, to me, it was like life and people one-on-one. What are we here for? What's the point? And how can we support each other in a more meaningful way than the way that I grew up learning about?
So at this point, let me just remind everyone that I'm speaking with Deran Young. At this point in your career, who were you thinking you wanted to work with or help?
Yeah, I was very specific that I wanted to go back into the Black community, and I wanted to help the little girl who was looking out the window just like I was. The little girl who was hopeful and, was full of dreams. Maybe she was a reader like I was, or she would write in her journal every day about what could be, just had this huge imagination, but also feeling very stifled, not feeling, as some people say, feeling far from the tree. I was very different one in my family. I was the only one who really could talk about my emotions, so much to where I stopped talking about my emotions or anything. I stopped talking about my ideas, my beliefs, my dreams. I stopped talking about everything probably around the age of 6, because I realized that there wasn't someone consistently there to hear and encourage that. So a lot of people growing up thought I was mute, because I just stopped talking. I was very quiet. I was very introverted. I was very dissociated. I didn't know the word for it. And I think dissociation actually saved my life. Being able to go away mentally when I was being sexually abused, or when I was hungry, or when we were homeless. I think that those are the things that kept my spirit intact, the ability to go somewhere else and to imagine something different. But I would want to be with that little girl. And I have had the opportunity to sit with girls like that, who've been through a tremendous amount of trauma in their first 5 years of life, and feel like it's their fault or something that they did wrong to deserve that. And I think the most important message I always have for people who are highly traumatized is that it's not your fault and you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. We just have to unlearn some of the things that we learned and relearn the things that you need, for yourself and for your life. And so for me, I really appreciate working with women of color, particularly. I'm starting to work more with men because I'm also raising a son. I have one child who happens to be a 10-year-old boy. So I'm learning a lot about the gender differences and patriarchy and how that really kind of bites all of us. The system that says men aren't human and women are subhuman, that men are gods, and women are less than. But all of these systems of oppression and challenges that come with that have really shaped my world in a way that I see these in everyone. I no longer have a target audience. I tell people right now, I mainly mentor other therapists because we have a network of 30,000 Black therapists. So I'm constantly pouring into these other therapists as a leader. But I really see my work as global, that we all have things within us, these parts of us, as Dick Schwartz says. I work a lot with IFS, and I've gotten to see the little boy or the little girl or the little person, right? Even if you're non-binary, the little person inside who's often hurting and hasn't been heard. And those are typically the people that I work with now, is more in a collective spaces, keynote speaking, podcasts like this, getting the message out to people who are still struggling with that inner child who has been silent or just hasn't been cared for.
You talked about doing that life skills program in the military. Was that the first time that you had actually been in therapy or seen a therapist, talked to someone about what had gone on?
I had talked to somebody when I was 15 years old, very briefly, and it didn't give me a good experience, to be honest. I thought I never wanted anything to do with that ever again. I had a suicide attempt when I was 15. Really more of a suicide gesture is what we call it in the military, that I felt like I didn't want to live anymore at 15. I felt like I had seen enough, done enough, and the life thing just wasn't working for me. And I felt like it
life thing.
Yeah, I feel like it was, because I was born Black and poor, that I was going to live a life of suffering. And if that was the case, I didn't want that for myself.
Right.
And I didn't want that for any children that I might have in the future. It just wasn't a livable life, in my opinion. And so I remember being forced to go see probably upper 40s, 50-year-old white woman who tried to get me to talk. And, teenagers, they're not, especially if you've already kind of introverted and don't trust anybody, it can be really hard to get them to open up. And I remember her saying, do you think that you feel that you don't deserve love because no one has shown it to you? And it really frustrated me because, as I said, up until that point, I did believe that my mother loved me. I just believed that she didn't have the skills or the resources to show that. And, even the mental abilities to show that you're connected with someone and that you love and can nurture them is a big ask for someone who's struggling with their own mental health issues. And so I felt like she didn't get it. Like, she didn't get me, she didn't get my family. And I felt like it was very critical and judgmental. And from that point on, I said, I see why Black people don't do this, why we don't go to therapy, or why we don't trust people that don't look like us and aren't seeking to understand us. And that question stood out in my mind for a long time because I didn't understand the question at 15 years old. Like, do you not feel deserving of love because you haven't been showed it? I didn't get that question it was like, what are you talking about? Right. And it took another probably 10 or 15 years for me to understand what she was trying to say. Because it was a foreign language to me. It was like she's speaking this other way of understanding or speaking, and I just didn't connect to that. And it was very it came across as power over to me. Like, I'm smarter, I have this skills, this knowledge that you need, and you need to understand that you need this. And It's like, well, how do we get to me needing that if I don't understand you don't understand me? So yeah, that kept me away from therapy for a long time and kind of gave me a bad taste. I think I went to like maybe 2 sessions and didn't go back ever again because it just didn't feel like it was helping in any way. And in some ways, it almost made me feel more isolated and more kind of alone in my own problems because I didn't feel any empathy or compassion from this person. And so I think that for me, what was different about engaging in the military in life skills was that I worked in the hospital. I knew the people there. They knew me. Everyone kind of knew me as a smiling person who's always walking in the hallway smiling. And when I was able to take that smile off and be something different, that was also accepted. When I was in a puddle crying about all of this trauma that I had and had never talked about, that too was also held with a lot of respect and honor. And so I think in the military environment, it's different because we want people to function. We want them to be able to go to work. We consider it highly functioning in the military, that most people are highly functioning. And I'm using air quotes because it's like we can pack our trauma away in a little box and keep going to work and even get deployed and go support a war. Doesn't necessarily mean that the war within has been resolved. So a lot of that surface level trauma and that talk therapy that I needed early on was really helpful for me to get it in the context of, I think in the non-military world or the civilian world, as we call it, I think it would be considered employment. What is it? The acronym, like when you go to work and you get therapy at work.
Oh, right.
I can't think of
something or yeah.
Yes, I see it a lot of times in our Facebook group because we have this group of 30,000 Black mental health professionals, and they're always talking about the work that they're doing. And I know that they do like short-term solution-oriented
EAP assistance program or something like that.
Yeah. So the military kind of functions in that way. The life skills section when I was there, it really kind of focuses on short-term solutions. How can we get this person functional or get them more functional so that they can do their job well? And that stance was actually really helpful for me early on.
All right. So as we kind of wind down here, You are, as you referred to, kind of leading this Black Therapist Rock group, and you said you're working generally on a more macro level, global level, kind of mentoring some of these individuals. What are you seeing in terms of the people in the group?
Yeah, I'm seeing a real need for healers to heal themselves, or to have spaces where they can come and talk about their own trauma and their own experiences, especially BIPOC healers. Hold on one moment. My son is very loud right now. Amir, quiet down. He has a friend over. So yes, just that healers often don't have a space for us to do our own work, and that we've been put into a position of power often and made to feel that we don't need to deal with our own trauma. And so I think for me, what's been really important is to say your trauma matters too. Even as a healer, even as someone who facilitates healing for everyone else, we still have to make sure that we're, putting our own mask on, for lack of better words, and that we're replenishing ourselves and able to care for ourselves in the same manner that we care for so many other people.
Okay. What would you say? I mean, you are you're on a mission. I mean, you clearly are. How would you articulate that mission?
I guess my mission is for all people to have access to healing in the way that works for them, in the way that's useful to them and helps them in their life, in their everyday life. Not from just a cognitive understanding, but from a lived perspective, in our relationships. I see so many therapists that are very isolated as well. I didn't realize this is it can be a very isolating career, because you're one-to-one with most people. You're, nowadays you're talking to a screen all day in your home, or, in some secluded environment. And we're often at the end of the day, very, kind of tapped out, if you will. You're exhausted emotionally and physically often. And so I think it's really, really important for us to just understand the importance of community. Like I created a community that I needed at the time that I needed, not after George Floyd, but I created this community after Trayvon Martin's murder, and trying to raise a son and understand, how do I raise a son in this world where Black boys are being targeted? And so community was kind of the best medicine that helped me with that collective trauma. And I think the importance of community has really kind of been diminished, if you will, in the Western medical model.
Right. All right, Deran, what's the best way for people to reach out to you? I have a feeling a lot of people are going to hear this and want to reach out to you.
Yeah, I would love for people to follow us on Instagram. We do have a social media audience of 150,000 followers between Facebook and Instagram, but we have really meaningful conversations on our Instagram page that I feel like really moves these conversations forward. I will also throw out my email if someone wants to email me about opportunities or resources that we have. My email is DeranYoungAssistant@gmail.com. So there's an assistant who goes through all the mail that I get every day and make sure that we respond and that we, are able to connect with people in a very real way. So those are the two main ways. And then, of course, our website, www.blacktherapисtrock.com.
Okay.
That's another way to support the work that we're doing.
And what's your Instagram?
Instagram is Black Therapist Rock.
Okay. All right. Awesome. We'll have that linked up at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Deran, love to have you back. You have to come back. You can, obviously there's a lot to talk about, and you have a lot of just knowledge and heart and gut and soul to share. I loved having you on here. It's an honor.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. All right. Take care.
Yeah, you too.